Hi, this is Kate, and we're talking about ratio. The first time many of you will encounter ratio in any meaningful way is when you start looking at colleges, and they'll often report their female to male student ratio. This place has a ratio of 1 to 1. This place has a ratio of 3 women for every 1 man. And this place has a ratio of 1 to 2.5. Some colleges will make a big deal out of these numbers and some of them won't. Some of your friends will act like they're important and some of them won't. But let's learn about what we're really talking about. If we're dealing with a female to male ratio of 2 to 3, it could be that we have exactly 2 women and 3 men. That would be a pretty small school. It could be that there are 4 women and 6 men. That's in the same ratio. If we have 6 women and 9 men, that's also in a 2 to 3 ratio. Well, what about if we have 12 women in a 2 to 3 ratio? How many men are there? There would have to be 18 men. Of course, you could have just counted the little figures on the screen, but you may have noticed that in a 2 to 3 ratio, to get 12, we would have to multiply the 2 by 6. So to stay in the same ratio, we'd have to multiply the 3 by 6, giving us 18. In fact, a 2 to 3 ratio is really just telling us that there are 2 groups of women and 3 groups of men, and these groups are the same size. It doesn't matter how big the groups are in order to stay in this ratio, as long as we have 2 equally sized groups of women and 3 equally sized groups of men. If we don't know how many are in each group, we can give them a letter. So let's see if you can figure this out. If the female to male ratio is 2 to 3, and there are 200 students at the school, how big is each group? There would be 40 students in each group. Perhaps you just noticed there were 5 groups altogether, and 200 divided by 5 is 40. But you also could have said, well, the 2 groups and the 3 groups add up to 200 students, and solve this equation. Combining the like terms, on the left we get 5x equals 200, and then we have to divide both sides by 5. So there are 40 students in each group. Okay, so if the women to men ratio is 2 to 3, and each group has 40 students in it, how many men attend this school? "120 male students go to this school because there are 40 students in each group and there are 3 groups of men." Now we'll use our understanding of ratio to solve a new problem in 2 different ways. The ratio of women to men at a local university is 5 to 4. If 3,000 students are women, how many are men? The women part of the ratio is 5. There are 5 groups of women. The problem also tells us that 3,000 women attend the university. If there are 5 groups of women and a total of 3,000 women, how big are the groups? "3,000 women divided into 5 groups means there must be 600 women in each group. The problem is asking how many men attend the university, and it also tells us there are 4 groups of men. So if there are 600 students in a group, how many men are there? "2,400 men attend the university because 600 times 4 is 2,400. We'll look at setting up this problem a different way. Notice that the ratio of 5 to 4 works out to be the same ratio as 3,000 to the thing we want to find. And as we saw in the previous slide, to stay in the same ratio, that means we're going to multiply each part of the same ratio by the same thing. In this case, multiply it by 6. So 5 times 6 is 3,000, and then 4 times 6 is our 2,400. We'll notice that by multiplying each number by the same thing, we're really creating equivalent fractions here. We could just as easily say that 5 over 3,000 is equal to 4 over x. That's how fractions work. A ratio is a kind of fraction. Another way to set this up would be to say the ratio of 5 over 4 is the same as 3,000 over x. These two equations mean the same thing. You just want to make sure that if you put the number that corresponds to women on the top on one side, you want to put the number that corresponds to women on the top on the other side. The number corresponding to men goes on the bottom on both sides. If we set it up the other way, we put the number that's in the original ratio on the top, and then we put the corresponding values that refer to numbers of students on the bottom. But notice something, to solve this, we're going to cross multiply, and no matter which way we set up the equation, we're going to get the same thing. 5 times x equals 3,000 times 4. 5 times x equals 3,000 times 4. We end up writing the same equation as long as we set up our fractions in this consistent fashion. And if we were to solve this for x, we'd want to divide both sides by 5. That would get us the answer that we got through our reasoning process, 2,400 men. Let's see how we can use proportions to solve a more difficult ratio problem. The ratio of women to men at a local university is 5 to 3. If women outnumber men by 720, how many men attend the university? Before tackling any problem, it's important to clarify what you're trying to find. So if you need to, read through the problem again and select what is it asking us to find. The total students, how many men, how many women, or what are your chances of admission? Right here, the problem is asking us to find how many men attend the university. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. What information does the problem give us? Well, it tells us that the ratio of women to men is 5 to 3. It might be helpful to draw a picture of what's going on. If we have 5 equally sized groups of women, then we also must have 3 equally sized groups of men. The last piece of the puzzle is that women outnumber men by 720. So we might want to label our diagram to show that this piece right here includes 720 students. Now at this point, you could probably reason through to an answer without using any algebra. It's kind of obvious that each of our groups have 360 students in them. So when we know how big the groups are, we could figure out how many men. But let's work it through with algebra, because if you have more than one way to solve a problem, you have more power over the problem. This problem doesn't tell us how many women or how many men. It only tells us how they relate to each other. So let's call the number of men m. And if that's the case, which expression represents the number of women? Since there are 720 more women than men, it's appropriate to call the number of women 720 plus m. These two numbers are in the same proportion as 5 to 3. So we have a couple options here. We could say 5 over 3 is the same as 720 plus m over m, keeping the numbers that represent women on the top of the fractions and the numbers that represent men on the bottom. Or we could say 5 to 720 plus m is the same as 3 to m, keeping the numbers that represent the ratios on the top and the number of students on the bottom, and keeping women on the left and men on the right. We just have to be consistent. If you solve either proportion, you should get the same answer. So please solve one of those equations for m. You should have gotten 1,080 men. Here's how. Either way, the equation you end up writing when you cross multiply is 5 times m equals 3 times the quantity 720 plus m. We want to multiply the 3 times the whole thing. So we'll need to distribute that 3. 5m equals 2,160 plus 3m. Now we'll get the m's together by subtracting 3m from both sides. And then to finish up, we need to divide both sides by 2. Now let's just make sure that we answered the question somewhere. The question was, how many men attend the university? So we just want to make sure we write our answer and put a box around it. This is Kate, and you've been learning about ratio.